The culture wars have seen statues removed and reputations cancelled. Now entire areas are in the line of fire because of their supposed historic connections. The popular district of Tulse Hill in London is said to be at risk of losing its name, which comes from a former Lord Mayor of London who had links to slavery. And this is not the only borough being urged to look back at its history. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has offered £25,000 to local authorities to decolonise their street names. To discuss this, I'm joined by campaigner and Head of Education for Don't Divide Us, Dr. Alka Sehgal Cuthbert. Thank you very much for joining us, Alka.
Hello, Andy. Thank you.
So could you tell us, this is an ongoing project, isn't it? And ever since those Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020, Sadiq Khan has been pushing for the idea of changing street names, removing monuments, this kind of thing. Isn't all of this quite well-intentioned?
It's, to be honest, I've no idea, but I just find it really either incredibly, stupidly naive or in bad faith or a mixture of both. It's, in 2020, it's like there's this it's like a sleeping beauty moment, Don't Divide Us. We had so many people write in saying, their companies, their businesses, their local council want to decolonise and diversify because of this great moment of awakening, if you like, in 2020 with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protest. And I can't see, it's like a fairy tale, and I like fairy tales as it happens, but I don't think you can make good public policy on fairy tales. And he set up the Commission for Diversity in the Public Realm. I mean, just that title alone gives you an idea of how kind of top heavy it is. And actually, he's not alone in doing this. As it happens, I think in 2014, Putin offered a referendum on changing the name of Volgograd back to Stalingrad that previously had been Tsaritsyn, I think. So this kind of idea of changing names, I think, however it's presented, I think we need to be very suspicious about it, and £1 million is going into this. And then that's been sectioned off into £25,000 for community projects. What a silly idea.
Do you know the extent of support, though, Alka, for this? Do you know whether the people of Tulse Hill, for instance, are supportive of the idea of changing the name of their area?
Well, what usually happens is that they will, when asked about this, they will say, oh, we've consulted with the community. But I mean, I think it's a very selective process. You look at the survey. I've had a quick look at the survey that they're putting out. And the first questions is, are you, your community, your faith or culture represented when you walk the streets of London? And I just think, oh, for goodness sake, when is this going to stop? When are non-white people going to stop being asked all the time about how we feel, whether we see ourselves represented? We don't all think the same. I don't feel I have to walk the streets and see myself everywhere I go. That would be just tedious and boring, and it's just sort of, it's encouraged. So I don't think it is, I doubt very much that they've consulted widely. I don't know who they have actually consulted with, but the pattern seems to be that certain groups of, activist organisations are invited or they send a survey in, and that constitutes the extent of the public consultation. Well, I doubt very much that they will have been.
Well, we've seen a lot of changes made irrespective of what the public think. Sometimes the public have been asked and the overwhelming decision is we don't want this to change, and they change it anyway. So, is it not the case that this is just now the policy? This is what's going to happen?
I think it's horrible. I think you're right. It is. It's very anti-democratic. Well, if you were to ask the people of Tulse Hill, we've got £1 million. Do you want us to spend it changing names, or shall we give, free bus passes to young people so they can roam around London and make the whole rich variety of London feel their own? Or do we spend that money on setting up, English as second language classes for immigrant mothers who can't speak English, who need lessons? There are 1,000,001 other things that you could spend money on or do to help people who feel that they can't participate fully in their local area do so more fully. But changing the names is just at best, it's just like a ineffectual performative symbolic change. And at worst, it just reinforces this, you have got your culture, you have got we've got our culture. My culture, London is my culture. When I'm in London, it belongs to me. It doesn't belong to Sir Henry Tulse. It doesn't belong to any single person. It belongs to the people who live there and have their relationships there, and who live their lives there.
But can we consider the other argument of this? I mean, I've spoken to people on this show who have been involved in, for instance, the Roads Must Fall campaign or the idea of removing statues, and they always tell me the same thing, that it's a form of violence to see an image of a slave trader prominently displayed, and as they interpret it, that is therefore celebrating the notion of slavery. I mean, this was the key argument in the Colston statue debate going on in Bristol, and that some activists say it feels like a form of violence against them. Do you take that point? Do you understand that point? And do you think there's any merit to it?
No, I don't. Because I think what that is doing is taking a single feeling, a single emotive response, and making that the dominant way in which to understand that event or that statue or that painting. And it's simply not the case. People are far more complex than that, and there will be a multitude of reactions amongst all people, whatever their skin color or whatever their, whichever country they come from. So no, I don't. And I think, I think even if you feel discomforted, I'm not saying that they don't feel discomforted, that they might feel discomforted. What I am saying is that emotional discomfort isn't a sufficient reason to go about, making a claim on public money or changing public policy.
And what about the argument that, iconoclasm has always existed? Iconoclasm is in of itself a historical fact and something, it's part of history, part of, you could even argue, part of progress. Is there something to be said for that argument?
Well, in the past there have been, but you've got to look at the specifics of the context. People fighting against a tyrannical dictator and then succeeding and tearing down a statue is very different to the mayor of London going around spending public money, consulting very particular groups and encouraging this kind of forced response almost. It's like a template response. It's a completely different thing. The political significance of those two things are very, very different. This, I would argue, far from it being a liberatory act, is actually encouraging a very passive attitude, I think, to the whole idea of belonging, to identity and to politics.
And in terms of, speaking as an educator, would you say that, there is a case to be made that we should be teaching people more about slavery, about the British government's complicity in slavery, this kind of thing? Because one of the major criticisms I often hear is that those things have just been whitewashed on history syllabuses throughout the country.
I've heard this. I read somewhere this is being presented as a kind of nice little primary school local education project. But that's not what it is, right? If you want to do a local education project in Lambeth, Tulse Hill is in Lambeth, you could look at John Sentamu. He's worked there for 13 years. It's very near Brixton. It's in Lambeth. Samuel Pepys was in Lambeth. This is a very selected event of slavery or colonial roots, and it's trying to present an approach to a historical event. I'm not against teaching anything in history, right? And as it happens, it's not true that it isn't taught. It is taught, but I think what the activists really want is they want it to be taught in a certain way. They want us to have a particular response to it. They want us to feel bad about it. They want us to kind of admit its guilt. But I think, I just don't see why, it's like railing at the past. Why do you want to encourage everybody to go, oh, you terrible people in, 300 years ago, 400 years ago? What good is that going to do? It's only going to, it's a total distraction from the problems in the present day, of which there are plenty, and which need a very different, much more open-minded approach to history, to knowledge, and to actual, contemporary problems. That money could be, it's £1 million going on this, right? I bet you, if you were to, send a survey out to the people in Tulse Hill and ask them what they would like £1 million to be spent on, changing street names or statues would not be very high up on it. I bet you that.
Well, it's a fascinating topic. Alka, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.